Well, there is a growing tension between East and West in this country. At the core is this question: is oil sands development in the West hurting manufacturing in the East? NDP leader Thomas Mulcair says it is the very definition of something called the Dutch disease. What's that? Well, here's your weekly West Block primer. Here's how some people see the situation in Canada. Oil production has been booming in Alberta with the development of the oil sands. That newfound wealth has seen the value of the Canadian dollar increase from 67 cents in 2003 to near or above parity with the US dollar for the past few years. That, say many, is hurting manufacturers in Ontario and Quebec, and here's why. NDP leader Thomas Mulcair calls it the Dutch disease. He's referring to a situation in Holland back in the 1960s and 70s. Natural gas deposits were discovered in the North Sea, and as production boomed, that newfound wealth, well, it pushed up the value of the Dutch guilder, and that made the export of local products simply too expensive, hurting the manufacturing sector. But many experts say that's not what's happening here. Manufacturing has been on the decline, they say, for decades, and a lower currency simply would not fix the problem. And Premier Brad Wall joins us now from Saskatoon. Premier, good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me here, and enjoy the show.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to start with some tweets that you sent aimed directly at Thomas Mulcair. And here's what you said in that tweet. Thomas Mulcair thinks that a strong resource sector is a disease. What is his cure? Higher resource taxes? NDP needs to explain. Well, so this week, Mr. Mulcair did. For the record, here's what he said.
With regard to any use of our natural resources, we want to see the upgrading, the processing, the value-added jobs kept in Canada. It makes no sense to be exporting raw bitumen to the Texas coast at WTI prices while we're importing into the east coast of the same country at Brent crude prices. We're not adding the value here. We're not adding the jobs here.
So, Premier, I guess what he's saying is that, you want the value added to be added here in Canada. What's wrong with what he's saying?
Nothing. He's absolutely right. We do want to add value here in Canada. We're doing that in Saskatchewan. We want to obviously be natural resource leaders in the world, but more importantly, we want to add value to it. We want to diversify our economy. But that's not what he was saying last week. That generated my own tweet and concerns from others. What he was talking about there was something completely different, which was to say, look, we have Dutch disease in Canada. Of course, though, this is it's a tenuous argument to make, because the same decline that has happened, unfortunately, in our manufacturing sector in central Canada has occurred in the United States, where there is no attendant resource boom. Moreover, the manufacturing sector in our province is relatively strong. Higher currencies certainly the currency rate, the exchange rate, makes it more of a challenge to export, but manufacturing sectors can be strong at a time of high exchange rates. And finally, Tom, what he said was he implied that we need to, quote unquote, internalize the environmental costs of resource development when he was making these Dutch disease comments. That sounds like a carbon tax to me. That sounds like a tax on resource development, not just the oil sands. And I think at a time when this is a part of the Canadian economy that's doing well, that's the kind of comment, that's the kind of policy notion that needs to be challenged, and I think he needs to better explain what he's talking about.
Are you getting concerned at all that there is an east-west split developing in this country over your natural resources and those of Alberta?
Yes, I am, Tom. I'm getting concerned about that, and it's informed by some of what Mr. Mulcair had to say and what the NDP are saying. They are aspirants to government in this country. They're the official opposition. He wishes to be the Prime Minister, and I worry that there has been a political calculus made with respect to these remarks, and they're not the first time. It's not the first time we've heard from him on this. And he released a paper in March called "The Tar Sands: Dirty Oil and Canada's Future." Not particularly helpful, by the way, even to conventional oil-producing provinces like Saskatchewan. We're trying to work on improving our brand and working to mitigate against CO2 and any environmental implications with oil development. But implied in that is a political calculus that says our growth will come politically for the NDP in Ontario and Quebec, and we're not so worried about the West, perhaps, where we don't have a lot of seats or prospects.
And that's where I was going to ask you to put it through your political prism if you want, and explain why it is. What's the political advantage in Tom Mulcair, as you say, dividing between East and West? Is it simply because you think that the NDP has given up on votes in Saskatchewan and Alberta?
I worry about that. Our NDP opposition here is silent, or at least in agreement with what the federal NDP party is saying, and with what the federal NDP are saying. And I make this point: they have one seat in Alberta. Of the 14 federal seats in Saskatchewan, they have no seats currently. And I worry that they've done the math and thought, well, if we're going to grow, if we're going to try to form a government, our growth is going to be in an area of the country where perhaps there's more traction for these kinds of comments, and that'll be divisive for the country, just by definition, because the resource strength of the country of Western Canada is a strength for all of the country. The fastest growing economies in the world today, Tom, they want food security and energy security. In that world, I like Canada's chances. I like Western Canada's chances, but not if we pursue policies informed by a political map that will actually damage the economic prospects of Western Canada, or the parts of our economy that are right now, fortunately, doing very well.
Brad Wall,
there's also
Go ahead.
Well, there's also very quickly the equalization argument. You know, Central Canada right now are benefactors of equalization, just as Saskatchewan was. That's also being driven by economic growth, and that, of course, is coming in the West, not only in the West, but it's here as well. So when you attack those economies, I think you put at risk those equalization dollars that fund programs in places like Quebec and Ontario.
Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall, always good having you on, sir. Good talking to you.
Thanks for the time, Tom.